Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this 32nd Legislative District Virtual Town Hall. Tonight, you'll hear from Senator Jesse Salomon, Representative Cindy Ryu, and Representative Lauren Davis. Our goal tonight is to provide you with an update on this year's legislative session and to respond to your questions and concerns about state government and issues before the legislature. Throughout this hour, please share your questions in the comment section wherever you're watching, whether it's Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter. Some of these questions that we're going to go through tonight were submitted in advance through our survey. And now let's get things started. Senator Salomon, can you start us off with some brief introductory remarks? And then we'll go to Representative Ryu and Representative Davis.
Sure, but how about we reorder this to allow the most senior member of our legislature for our delegation to go first? That'll be Representative Ryu.
Thank you very much, Senator Salomon. And he is not saying I'm the oldest of the bunch, which I am. Hi, everyone. Happy New Year. 2022 session is underway, and we have been working really hard. And specifically for me, I have been working on public works broadband, as well as community reinvestment fund that another legislator introduced, as well as, of course, small business assistance. One of the bills that did not pass is House Bill 1707, wearing of life jackets on canoes, kayaks, and stand-up paddle boards. And we know from extensive government-to-government relationships with the 29 federally recognized tribes in Washington state that some Native Americans like the Salish and the Duwamish people have a long history of being over-policed on the waters, including aggressive actions by the state to remove them from the waters that the state Supreme Court later affirmed as their treaty right to access for fishing. The source of their expertise is thousands of years of history from time immemorial of operating canoes safely through their own cultural teachings around water safety. And so some of the tribal governments asked me to include an exclusion for them. And so I included a very narrow exclusion and a mechanism as to how to deal with proving their federally recognized tribal membership. So it's been quite an exciting session so far. Senator Salomon.
Thank you, Representative Ryu. I am glad to say, at least on the Senate side, we are partially back in person, and I've been able to be on the floor, vote on the floor all of last week, work out of my office, and it feels good to be back. It's easier to get work done for the people. So this has been an exciting session. It is a short session. It tends to be designed to follow up on the bills that we passed and during the long session the year before. We have a supplemental budget, so the main budget lasts for 2 years, and we do nips and tucks. Even so, it's been an intense month and a half so far. Some of the bills that I've been working on that are still alive include environmental bill to help salmon. I think you come to any town hall any year and you hear me say that, but it's a new bill, 5885. And another one around housing. I think it's really important, not just that we fund public housing, which is important, but also on the private side that we create supply. I do think that over time, you increase the supply, you decrease the cost. And we do have a middle housing crisis and a low-income housing crisis. So this bill would take away some of the delays and unnecessary appeals that are now part of the process.
I think that's me. So hi, everybody. Good evening. Thanks so much for making time to join us tonight. So I have continued to work this session on my work related to behavioral health, so mental health and substance use disorders. And folks who are listening are probably very well aware that we have a lot more people struggling with mental health and substance use challenges currently than we did pre-pandemic. That's because the pandemic led to isolation and unemployment and basically an increase in stressors and what we would call risk factors, and then a decrease in protective factors. So that's things like for our youth, being able to go to school and participate in sports and some of the things that help buoy them through those stressors. So what we have currently is a lot more people in need of behavioral health services. and we have a lot less, unfortunately, behavioral health providers. The workforce we did have was quite decimated. So I've been working a lot, both in policy and in the budget, to try to stabilize our behavioral health workforce and try to increase access to services at a time where services are needed more than ever. I've got a bill particularly associated with trying to expand the use of certified peer specialists, so people who are actually in recovery themselves doing this work. I've got another bill related to making sure that we do not discharge individuals from inpatient psychiatric and substance use treatment into homelessness. I'm also working very hard with my wonderful seatmates to bring behavioral health services to our district. So I'm very excited to announce the Senate capital budget came out this afternoon, and the Senate fully funded the Linwood Recovery Center, which will be a 31-bed behavioral health crisis facility, first of its kind in Snohomish County, right here in our district. And I'm very, very grateful for that.
All right. Thank you, lawmakers, for those introductions. And, we're here to hear from folks in your community. So let's dive right in. We're going to hear from Cynthia first. She wrote a question on the survey that we sent out, and her question deals with housing. So here's her question. She says, I want to thank you for all your leadership with issues that are important for our district. My neighbors and myself appreciate all your hard work this session with housing bills. And Cynthia also says, thank you for grandfathering in existing homeowners associations into House Bill 1660. That's from Representative Shoemake, and it deals with accessory dwelling units. Can you talk about that bill and what it's going to do for your community?
Yes, thank you. It is the best ADU bill in the nation to start making that progress. And I am very thankful to Representative Shoemake, as well as, of course, local government chair Jerry Paulette, who worked really hard on it. It matches California's accessory dwelling unit bill, which was held up as a model. And after our extensive conversations, we improved upon it. And so other people asked what's happening to House Bill 1782. And so actually 1660 is equivalent to what that bill tried to do. And it is obviously about buildable lots beyond a half mile from transit and requiring allowance, not a mandate, of an ADU, including detached ADUs, which look and work the same as a duplex unit, or more commonly known as mother-in-law apartments or cottage apartments on that same lot. So I am very happy about that bill that's in the Senate right now.
All right, thank you for that. All right, let's stay with sort of the same topic. Let's go to Marion. She also sent a question on our survey, and she asks, what's being done about homelessness? It seems worse than ever this year.
Sure, I'm happy to jump in on that one. So last session, we made some really historic investments related to housing homelessness, both in the form of operating budget dollars, and that includes things like we substantially funded host teams, which are teams that go out and work with folks that have experiencing psychiatric symptoms that might be contributing to their homelessness. We also funded this massive investment in a statewide recovery navigator program, which works with folks, including folks experiencing homelessness and co-occurring substance use disorder, to kind of get them into services. We made a ton of investments for housing vouchers of every different variety that you can imagine, related to rental assistance, but also housing vouchers for people who have co-occurring behavioral health challenges and homelessness. We also made major investments in the Housing Trust Fund in terms of capital dollars to build more housing. We made investments in the acquisition of what they call single room settings, so things like hotels and motels, so we can try to buy up properties quickly and convert them essentially to what would be similar to permanent supportive housing, but they can be stood up very, very quickly. We will continue to see investments like that this session. We have a lot of one-time money still left over from the federal government COVID relief money, and we expect to use some of those monies for additional housing projects, and we should see additional monies in the budget associated with the suite of services to support folks experiencing homelessness and transition them into housing.
And I would just add real briefly, I have a bill 5979 that I just introduced. It's not designed to pass this year, but to start a conversation around drug use and public drug use and what we're going to do when our Blake fix, the bill that we passed after the court invalidated our prohibition against drug possession, expires in a year. We're going to have to revisit. And I have an out-of-the-box idea that would say that it would be a civil infraction, not a criminal charge, but that you would have to go through a substance use disorder assessment, and the court would supervise it if the assessment says that you need to do treatment. And there would be some consequences and sanctions if you don't. And that's just designed to keep you on the course to finish treatment. But you wouldn't have a criminal record. So I'm trying to get something out of the box here.
All right, thank you. All right, we're going to go to a new topic. We're going to go to climate change. This question's from Dean, also from the survey. And, you know, before I go into the question, this is a good opportunity to remind folks who are watching at home, please ask your questions in the comment box and we'll get to as many live questions as we can. All right, to Dean, he asks this, he says, global warming is an existential threat to our children and our grandchildren. What action can we expect from our legislators to avoid the climate catastrophe?
Thank you, Dean. I'll take that question. First of all, climate change is real. It's an existential threat. I agree. I don't understand why it's been so hard to get a consensus across the aisle on that. And that in itself is extremely frustrating and disheartening. I do want to say, on a positive note, last year I co-sponsored and we passed the Climate Commitment Act. That is the major landmark climate change bill. We are now teamed up with California and the province of Quebec to create a market, cap and trade market that will drive down the use of carbon over time. We've passed 100% clean energy bill the year before that. We are leaders in this country, if not the world, on this. So rest assured that we do have our eye on the ball. And there are some other bills this year around residential natural gas that I'm going to take a look at now that it's over the Senate side. I haven't read it yet, but we're working on it. Thanks for your question.
Well, you know, Senator, since you answered that one, I'm going to stick on the same topic and go to Ariana, who's watching on YouTube. Ariana is asking a question about House Bill 1770. That is a bill that already passed the House, and it deals with energy codes. Ariana asks if, Senator, you'll champion that in the Senate. Ariana says, climate is one of my top concerns, and I want our local jurisdictions to have the ability to create stronger residential energy codes.
Thank you. Yeah, that was the bill I was just referring to that came over from the House. I haven't read it cover to cover yet, so I'm interested in this issue, and I will be working on it, but I have to read it first. It goes through so many changes in the House or the Senate if we're sending it over, so you want to wait till it comes over.
All right, thank you. All right, I'm going to combine a couple more questions on the next one about police reform. Kathy's watching on Facebook, and Camille sent us a question from the survey. They both want to know what's going on with police reform.
Sure. Do you want me to take that first, or Representative Davis? Okay, I'll take it. So last year we passed, I think, 13 bills in response to numerous building issues and frustrations, but obviously the George Floyd murder sort of broke the dam and allowed us to put in some real reforms, including banning chokeholds and neck restraints, banning no-knock warrants, requiring de-escalation, beefing up the state board that can decertify police officers if they use excessive force. All that stuff remains in law and will remain. I do believe that we took a step too far with respect to, well, let me put it this way. When you pass big policy changes, you don't always know how they're going to play out in real life. So I spent a lot of the interim talking to police and sheriffs and prosecutors and other folks, and they were saying that we can't do the basic functions of our policing. We can't hold somebody during an investigative detention, even to find out what happened during a domestic violence stop. And I've seen some actually, frankly, very scary domestic violence cases. I'm a public defender. that worried me for the safety of the victims because of some of these changes. So we have been voting on bills that would make some tweaks and allow police to do the basic functions of their job, which they should be able to do. But I want to emphasize that most of the reforms will remain in place.
Yeah, and I'll just piggyback on what Senator Salomon said. I think the reforms that we did pass led to a real culture shift in policing in terms of just a massive awareness and thoughtfulness around use of force, and specifically House Bill 1310. Through Initiative 940, there had been a lot of conversations about deadly force, but House Bill 1310 led to conversations about use of force at all, use of force of any kind. And so I do think even with House Bill 2037, which does allow very minimal use of force to prevent somebody from leaving what's called a Terry stop, which is the investigative detention Senator Salomon mentioned, that any use of force of any kind is subject to that reasonable care standard, and the law enforcement officer needs to exhaust the de-escalation tactics that are outlined in 1310. So, I mean, I do think there's been a real sea change, and that's really welcome. And, we've seen a massive reduction, frankly, in police killings of the public because of it. So it's very encouraging. Anytime we pass large transformational policy change, there's often small tweaks that are needed subsequently, and I think this is no different.
All right, thank you. So Vicky also sent us a question from the survey. She has a question about guns. I know there's several pieces of legislation going through the process this year. One is Senate Bill 5078 related to high capacity magazines. It's only one of many this year. So maybe we could hear from you about what's going on with gun safety this year.
Sure, I can start on that one. That bill, we actually heard it in the Civil Rights and Judiciary Committee in the House today, and we had a lot of people signed in to testify. We had hundreds signed in to actually testify, and then we had close to 20,000 that signed in to state their position. So a lot of interest and a lot of focus on this bill. We do know that banning high capacity magazines specifically can be extremely important when we're looking at mass shootings, because it requires the shooter to reload if they have to reload their magazine, and that's frequently when there's an opportunity for a bystander to intervene, and that's been true in a number of different high-profile shootings around the country. So we heard that bill. The thing that's different this year is that it specifically looks at banning the sale and manufacture as opposed to the possession of the high capacity magazines. That's one difference. There's a lot of conversation around what the number should be, 10 or 15 or 21 bullets. So that is an ongoing dialogue. The Senate, of course, did pass it over to us in the House. In the past, we tried this 2 years ago in 2020, and the Republicans, I think, put 200 amendments on the bill, which effectively killed it, because it would have taken about 2 weeks of consistent 24/7 floor action. I do think it's a little bit of a different story, though, when it's just looking at the sale and manufacture and not the personal possession of the high capacity magazines. But when we look at gun violence prevention policies that are really significant and lead to lives saved, I would say this tops the list.
All right, thank you. Let's go to a Facebook question, and a reminder to everybody who's watching live. This is a live virtual town hall with your 32nd legislative district lawmakers. So please send us your questions in the comment section wherever you're watching. And Naz is watching on Facebook, and they say, thanks for all your leadership. My question is to Senator Salomon. I would like to know about Senate Bill 5660 and psilocybin treatments.
Great, thank you for that. That psilocybin it was listed as a Schedule I drug during the 1960s when the federal government got involved in drug prohibition, and they scheduled it along with cocaine and heroin as something that has no no medicinal value, no scientific research value. And they were wrong to put those drugs together. And the reason why they did it, in my opinion, is a culture war, right? The hippies were using it and it was threatening the status quo. And so they stamped it out. Well, research was really positive before that. And recently, Johns Hopkins University has been able to do research with psilocybin, finding that it helps amazingly with PTSD, with addiction treatment, anxiety, depression. So this bill is not a legalization bill in the sense that one would be able to go buy psilocybin at the store like marijuana. So that's not what this is. This says that it creates a licensure overseen by the Department of Health, where certified trained people would counsel you and would sit with you during the trip, and then offer integrative therapy for those who want to engage in that practice. This would just create a safe mechanism to do that, and also for them to know how and where the psilocybin was grown and what they're taking and what dosage. I want to emphasize that this drug has been used for thousands of years before we even thought about, before the United States was a country, before there was drug prohibition, Schedule I. This is something really different than what we commonly think of as illegal drugs. And we heard from veterans over and over in our hearing, combat veterans who were suicidal, who had tried everything, had gone to the VA, and that 3 months of this therapy trumped 12 years of the therapy that they've been doing at the VA. I don't know how you can ignore that. It's amazing, and we need to look at it. Bill did not move this year. There's a task force to work with the Department of Health to move this along, and we're working on that. So a pretty positive rollout, and we'll keep working on it.
All right, let's go to Paul, who sent us a question on the survey. Paul has a question about catalytic converter theft, HB 1815. He asks, is this just a study bill for a year? Senate Bill 5495 seems to take effect sooner. Can you compare the bills and speak to the virtues of each of them?
Yes, I'll take that question. My bill, House Bill 1815, is not just a study bill. It's actually bringing together, I believe at this point, 19 work group members, and they range all the way from vehicle manufacturers to catalytic converter manufacturers, insurance companies, judges, even people who have served time for theft, and definitely something that everyone wanted to be included in, including scrap metal recyclers. And so the approach is completely different from 1815 from the Senate bill. So what it does is that we require scrap metal businesses engaging in a transaction involving a catalytic converter removed from a vehicle to record the documentation of it, that it came from a vehicle that was registered to them and not stolen. And that makes it easier for law enforcement. And we are actually committed to making sure law enforcement has the resources and the training to deter catalytic converter thefts and respond adequately when that happens. As you may recall, in the past, and even now, we still have copper wire theft and other thefts that are creating havoc for our utilities. And obviously, catalytic converter thefts are creating a huge havoc for people who are losing them, but also losing time. And even when insurance companies pay for it, we end up paying for it again when our insurance rates go up. So this legislation, it lays the groundwork to reverse the massive spike in thefts that communities around the state are experiencing. And as you all know, they contain a tiny bit of precious metals, which can be sold for quick cash. And so the work group, they will be coming back before the end of the year with their recommendations as to exactly how we should individually mark the catalytic converters of existing vehicles. And what the manufacturers have said is that if they start working on it now, in about 7 years, they should be able to do that for the catalytic converters. But it does take them 7 years. So hopefully in 7 years, we've more or less handled it for the new vehicles. But in the meantime, we have to make sure that our law enforcement, local law enforcement, have the resources in order to go after the bad people, the thieves, basically.
All right, let's go to Wally. Wally has a question about no-knock warrants and cash bail. Is there a legislative committee looking at those two issues, no-knock warrants and cash bail reform?
Thanks, Wally. Wally from Linwood. I'm assuming so. Hello, good to hear from you. So we banned no-knock warrants last year. There's no movement to change that. So that's done, as much as anything is. There was we had some hearings in Senate Law and Justice on cash bail and bail reform. My understanding is there's no votes, not sufficient votes to move the policy. So I don't expect that this policy that the policy that we have now on bail is going to change much. I don't think there's a legislative committee looking at that, Wally. But, you know, different members come in with different priorities every year. So we'll see what happens. But at this point, I don't think it's moving. There's no bill on it right now.
All right. We have a question from Letty, who's watching on Facebook. They ask, or they say, we really need access to different languages in schools. Is there anything in the works being done about this?
Why, yes. Our wonderful colleague in the House, Rep. Tina Orwell, actually just passed a bill, and I apologize, I don't know the bill number offhand, but it was quite literally about language access in schools, and it does a number of things, including some funding, of course, but also making sure that each school has someone designated to actually support language access, because so many parents are so interested and yet unable to participate in a meaningful way in their children's education because of language access. So that is really exciting to pass that off the House floor, and some very compelling floor speeches, and it is now in the hands of the Senate.
All right, thank you. Let's go back to Facebook. This question is from Keen. They say, is there a bill to hold plastic manufacturers responsible for recycling costs?
There was a bill, I think, by Senator Doss, if that's what you're referring to. I think that bill's dead. I don't know why.
All right, Lisa has a question. She says, do you support increasing the prototypical school formulas for physical, social, and emotional support in schools, and specifically increasing the number of school nurses, counselors, and social workers? Looks like this question is related to House Bill 1664.
Yes. Oh, go ahead, Rep. Rio, I'm sorry.
I remember voting for it out of appropriations not that many days ago. Representative Davis, do you remember voting for it on the floor?
Yes, yeah, we did. It was our colleague from the Whatcom County area, Rep. Rule, who's actually a social worker by profession. And yeah, it was, I believe the price tag on it was $671 million, which is a very significant general fund state investment. But it was really about those ratios. So increasing the ratios for school counselors, school social workers, school psychologists, and school nurses, because clearly we have so many young people who are experiencing distress more than ever. And, you know, to be clear, we had a children's mental health crisis that predated the pandemic. The year before the pandemic, we had a 400% increase in pediatric emergency visits for mental health reasons. And so COVID only made that worse, and our students are really suffering, and we're excited to make those additional investments this year.
Thank you. Okay, Janelle sent us a question on the survey related to getting people outside and into, you know, the wilderness. Here's the question. What does the Outdoor Recreation Caucus do?
I'll take that question. I am actually one of the 4 co-chairs of the Outdoor Recreation Caucus. And part of the reason I became involved is state parks does come to the committee that I chair, which is Community and Economic Development. And a couple of years ago, advocates asked me to hold roundtable meetings about funding our outdoor, not only recreation, but also the facilities such as state parks and DNR land, as well as fish and wildlife lands. And so after a couple of years of leading that group, we decided, you know what, there's already a caucus, let's go ahead and join it. So one from each corner, both in the 2 from the Senate and 2 from the House, we decided we'll share the responsibilities. So what I know is that we actually have a huge backlog of maintenance and operation funding that we needed. And that was even before the COVID-19 pandemic. And as you all know, during the pandemic, as we could not no longer fly safely or even go to concerts and theaters and so on, many of us chose to go outdoors because we could, for many different reasons, mental health, physical health, and then also being housebound for so long, going on 2 years now. And so I've actually asked for a proviso, which is one way of funding extra money above and beyond what the governor was able to ask for, because he has to submit a balanced budget request. And so I've asked for extra money to fund those outstanding needs. And so I'm looking forward to working closely together with each of the caucus in making sure that we have not only the best policies, which we can work on, but also at least get at the down payment on making sure that our parks and facilities and trails are maintained. I'm sure my seatmates have a lot to say about the benefits of outdoor recreation as well.
Sure, I could say it reminds me of a bill I introduced 2 years ago called the Wilderness Therapy Bill, working to get insurance coverage for behavioral therapy programs, different sort of treatment programs, or basically for struggling teenagers to go out into nature. And I just think nature has such a beneficial effect on people, and there's unfortunately a lot of youth who don't get to experience it. I think it could, the therapy program could create a lot of new passions and interests and really help kids get out of a rut, so to speak, if they are in one. That bill didn't pass. It's hard to get insurance to cover things, right? They fight it. They fight your bills. So it got turned into a study, which is better than nothing, but the study got delayed because of COVID. So hopefully we'll get it in this year. I think we'll get it this year and see where we can move forward.
Let's go to Jerome, who's watching on Facebook. And a reminder to everybody who is watching, this is a live virtual town hall. So please send us your questions in the comment section wherever you're watching, whether it's YouTube, Facebook, or Twitter. And Jerome, he's watching on Facebook. Jerome says, where do each of you stand on adopting a statewide single-payer healthcare system in Washington?
Sure, I can start as a member of the healthcare committee. I am wholeheartedly supportive, and there's been a lot of dialogue about this. I'll offer, as I always do when this question comes up, just the unfortunate reality that without some significant policy changes at the federal level and some significant dollar figures at the federal level, it's really difficult to do this successfully. Vermont made an effort to do this, and their system was not successful because they didn't have the support from Congress. And so it's really something that if we were to do this in a meaningful way where it achieves the aims and the vision that I think many of us have, including the question asker, we really would need to do it ideally in partnership with our federal partners.
Let's stick with healthcare and go to Charles. Charles sent us a question in the survey. Charles says, what are you doing to modify Washington's new long-term care law? He's especially concerned about not being able to use it in another state. And for folks watching this, the state's new long-term care law is Washington Cares. You've probably heard about it.
So I'm happy to take that question. We passed 2 bills. Again, like I said, when we pass big policy bills, and especially in the long session, we kind of wait to see how they start playing out, and then we come back in the short session if we need to tweak it. We call it a trailer bill. It's a well-worn path. So what we did this year to fix it is we delayed the start time for the premium assessments. We returned any of the premiums that we had already collected. We delayed the date that the benefits become available until 2026. And so some of the folks would have had to pay in, some of the folks in their 60s, and yet they would not have collected anything. So we changed that so that they can make partial collections so that it's fair. They get in what they put out. And then we made it so that people who live outside of the state but work inside the state don't have to pay in. I don't believe we made it portable. We're hoping that other states would pick up our example and then we could share it. But financing doesn't work out that way. I do think it's a weakness of the bill. A lot of us want to go somewhere sunny when we retire, but we'll keep working on it. Still think it's a good policy.
I do think, just on the out-of-state issue, we did something for neighboring states, though, I believe, folks who are working in Washington State but residing in Oregon or Idaho.
All right, let's go to Chris. Chris sent us a question in the survey. Chris's question is about House Bill 1901. It relates to domestic violence and adding some new definitions to the law about what is domestic violence. And the bill relates to coercive control. Can you explain to us what that means and how it'll help folks who are dealing with domestic violence?
Sure, I'm happy to take that question. So, a lot of times our state statutes, our laws haven't really caught up with research, and that is the case with this particular legislation. Under current Washington state law, a person who is a victim of domestic violence can only receive what's called a DVPO, a domestic violence protection order, if the perpetrator has raped them, beaten them, or stalked them. It's a pretty narrow definition, and each one of those, as you might imagine, is an actual crime. So there's an extremely high threshold for issuing protection orders. But it turns out that the data suggests that actually isolated incidents of physical violence are not what's most predictive of intimate partner homicide and lethal violence. It's actually what we call coercive control. So it's actually the level of control in a relationship, and that many perpetrators of domestic violence use an array of tactics that frequently include causing the victim to be isolated from family and friends. Frequently, we'll see an uptick in domestic violence when a victim moves away from family and friends, and then that's when the perpetrator really increases the violence. Tracking the victim through electronic means is very common. Other examples of coercive control include a perpetrator threatening perhaps to harm the children or harm the pets, threatening suicide, threatening to hurt the victim or hurt, destroy property that's important to the victim. All of these different ways and mechanisms to essentially make the victim comply and coerce the victim, hence the name coercive control, into certain behaviors at the hands of the perpetrator. And again, we know that this is highly predictive of intimate partner homicide, and yet currently not a basis for the issuance of a protection order. There will still be obviously a court proceeding. A victim still has to prove by preponderance of the evidence that the perpetrator has engaged in these acts of coercive control, but it really does catch our statutes up with the science and really will really help to prevent against these really significant lethal events. DV homicide is up 30% in the last year. It is absolutely horrific. And we've had a number of cases in King County, homicides and murder suicides, all DV related, just in the past several weeks. So thank you for the question, and look forward to expanded access to protection for DV survivors.
All right, thank you. Let's go back to Facebook. Bill has a question. Bill wants to know, what are your thoughts about how we can save the salmon runs in Washington?
Anybody want to take that? It's me. It's because my name is Salomon. You take away the O and it's salmon. No, I've been very active in that. The transportation budget this year has $500 million for stormwater retrofits. So when we developed our highway system in the 50s and 60s, we didn't think about water pollution. So a lot of the runoff that's created by cars, so like, rubber from the tires, things like that, get into the water, kill the salmon. Finally, we have real significant investments that we just passed out of the Senate to go back and fix that. But this is a multifaceted approach. I have a bill that helps restore marine shorelines, so that when salmon migrate out to sea, they have refuges, places to hide. Because right now, the way we built out the Puget Sound with seawalls and docks and things like that can make it challenging. So trying to find that right balance. We have a gillnet buyout. So gillnetting, for example, in the Columbia River, any wild salmon that touches a gillnet has at least a 48% death rate, even if gillnetters aren't allowed to keep them. So we were trying to move towards something called pound nets. The Wild Fish Conservancy is a nonprofit agency, design something that can corral salmon in the water, identify, because hatchery fish have their adipose fin clipped off, identify if they're hatchery or wild, and literally open a hatch in the water so the wild fish swim out, and then harvest the hatchery fish. Much better way to do it, right? It's easy to create hatchery fish. It's hard to revive wild runs, which are genetically better off, superior, outcompete. So you need to save wild salmon. Unfortunately, there's just a lot of controversy. The Department of Fish and Wildlife has really been dragging their feet on any kind of change. They are, I think, politically connected to the gillnetters and will just never let that go. It's been a source of frustration. The tribes, for some reason, feel threatened by any non-tribal gillnet reform because I think, well, I won't speak for them. So that bill is dead, the pound net bill. It's very frustrating. It's a difficult issue, and I'll keep working on it. And we got climate change too, don't save the salmon.
All right, thank you. And just a reminder for folks, we're still working remotely, so you may have just heard a really loud siren on the feed. I apologize for that. This is the moderator speaking, and a really loud siren just went by my apartment as I'm speaking to you all right now. But anyways, let's go back to a question from the survey. This is from Patrick. And Patrick wants to know, when will the legislature tackle the issues surrounding the $30 car tabs initiatives that the people have approved?
Want me to take that?
Sure, go ahead, please.
So just real quick, I'd say, fundamentally, if we don't have roads and bridges that are functioning, we don't have an economy, right? We can't move around. We can't get anywhere. We can't move goods from the ports with trucks to where we're going. So it's sort of a pound foolish and a penny wise to underinvest in our transportation system. I'm really proud of the package we just passed and sent over to the House. It doesn't raise the gas taxes. It is focused on equity, it's focused on transportation and greening the transportation infrastructure, as well as fixing our bridges, roads, and ferries. So we have to think about making smart investments for the future.
And I'm also looking forward to voting for that transportation package, because that's one of the pillars of infrastructure that we must have for us to, of course, to get to and from, but also to basically part of the Salmon passage that we need to work on. So we can't, and of course, we are all driving around on roads that have lots of potholes right now, especially after the freezing weather that we had. And so we have to pay for it one way or another. And definitely operations and maintenance of it. But fixing the potholes when they're small is way more efficient and better for our cars, because if we're driving over them, we are incurring millions of dollars worth collectively in damages to our vehicles. So I believe we must, for economic development, for our safety, for preserving our vehicles, never mind the roads, that we have to somehow pay for our highways and roads and bridges too.
All right, thank you, folks. So we are just about to our last question. I think this very well could be our last question here. I think it's a really good one to end on. It's really a philosophical question. It comes from Jane. Jane wants to know, what can we do to promote civil discourse?
Well, I think we kind of illustrated it when the House had a 9-hour session overnight from, what time was it, 8 p.m. to 6:30 a.m. Maybe it was more, felt like 12 hours. But I think as long as we concentrate on the policy itself, and the speaker had to continuously remind us, please don't impugn others, but please stick to the policy itself. So if we commit with each other to talk about the policy themselves and consider different ideas, I think we can go a long ways. And I think that's a foundation for democracy also.
I'll just offer that I think it will get easier when, God willing, the pandemic winds down and we can be back together in person. I have a former Republican colleague across the aisle who's a law enforcement officer who always used to say it's hard to hate up close, and he's right. And when we are sparring on an issue on opposite sides of the floor debate, but then breaking bread together in the members' cafeteria, that means something, and I think that helps to promote civil discourse, frankly. And it has been harder. It's been more strained, candidly, since we are sparring over Zoom squares. So I really do look forward to that in-person conversation with my colleagues of all stripes.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. I hope you found this event informative. This has been a 30-second legislative district virtual town hall with your state lawmakers, Representative Lauren Davis, Representative Cindy Ryu, and Senator Jesse Salomon. And I'll turn it back to the three of you to provide us with some closing remarks. Maybe we'll go in reverse order this time.
Sure. Thanks, Curtis. I really just want to thank everybody so much for your time tonight and for being here. Thank you for your questions. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of them. We are all certainly available. Please do email us, contact us through the constituent form, or send emails to our legislative accounts, or call the legislative hotline. We are deeply and genuinely interested in your ideas and your concerns and your questions. So please don't hesitate to reach out. We can also help if you're having an issue with a state agency, or need help with any sort of state government related issue, or even if you're not sure if we can help, please don't hesitate to reach out. Thanks, everybody.
I would just part by saying what a privilege it is to serve you. This is a job like no other that I've had or that I could imagine. It's a job that carries a great weight of responsibility. I remember having a decisive victory on election night and thinking I would be elated, but really just feeling a sense of overwhelming responsibility at the job I was undertaking. And I wear that, and I wear it proudly. This job is exciting, exhilarating, frustrating, overwhelming, all wrapped up in a bow. but it is always deeply meaningful. We are at the pinpoint of change. We had a question about civility. This is where, if we act graciously, we grow civility between the chambers. And that's an opportunity that I think I've taken. And I just want to say, thank you for letting me to do this job on your behalf.
Yes, it's definitely been a privilege to be representing you in the House, in the People's House. And the 98 of us in the House, we do depend on each other as a team, even if we might be having floor fights and 9-hour debates on one particular bill. And even some of the questions that were posed to us that are not legislative, that we could not really answer in this forum, we definitely depend on and work together with the local city council members and mayors, as well as, of course, we stay in touch with our congressional members. So it's definitely been a privilege to be serving you. And as a citizen legislature, we can only be as good as what you ask us to do. And of course, we are staffed by wonderful people like Curtis and others who make us look good and make sure that we don't forget particular issues. And so really deeply appreciative. And of course, I have fantastic seatmates. And so thank you so very much for your attention and paying attention. And only your paying attention keeps us strong as a democracy. So really appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great evening.